With this report, the Ballyhea Says No group hands over its campaign to our elected politicians.
A presentation of a report on the Eurozone crisis.
Okay, thank you, Manon, and I apologise in advance to the interpreters for my accent and for the speed at which I speak, because in Cork we speak very quickly. Thank you, Luke, for that, and thank you for your support over the last 9 years. You've been constant, one of the few constants with us. I'd also like to thank the staff in Luke's office that are at the back there, Mark especially, Jimmy, Emma and John, who have helped me with this over the last few months. I'd also like to thank especially Sana, Manon and Paco here, and the GUI NGL group for this opportunity here, and Sana for the work you've done for the last few days, like to get me in here, because it looked for a while as if I wouldn't get here. At the back there, you might notice I've hung a banner from the Ballyhea Says No group, because there are 18 people in Ireland now at the moment, and by God, they are disappointed not to be here. But circumstances are what they are, so they're here in spirit, represented by that banner back there. Even though they're not with me, I suppose it's, for me anyway, it's comforting to look down and see a lot of familiar faces, because I spent a lot of time here in the last few years. And the report will take less than an hour to present, but has been 7 months in the writing, 9 years in the formation. It is the penultimate action of the Ballyhea Says No group, the final act of which would be our march in Ballyhea this coming Sunday. That will be the last time we march. For the Eurozone member states hardest hit, these have been 9 years of hardship, 9 years of suffering and sacrifice, 9 years of austerity policies imposed from Brussels and from Frankfurt, 9 years wasted, 9 years lost. And during that period, many books, studies and reports have been written, analysing what happened, assessing the EU response, with the crisis explored from many different angles. But the question we in the Ballyhea group ask, and the question asked in this report, goes deeper than most of those analyses and asks, was the euro itself a primary cause of the crisis? And the conclusion reached is that yes, certainly, absolutely, the euro itself is a primary cause of the crisis, perhaps even the primary cause. There are 17 chapters in the report. It's fairly comprehensive, broken up as follows. 1, introduction. 2, executive summary. 3, euro design. 4, flawed concept to flawed currency. 5, crisis foretold. 6, crisis unfolds. 7, fueling the flames, the EU response. And then the EU response is broken down into the next 3 chapters by institution: the Commission and the Parliament, the Council, basically the Eurogroup, and the ECB. Then Chapter 11 is feeling the burn, the countries worst affected. And then, of course, there were Eurozone winners, that's Chapter 12. Additional testimony from other experts. Chapter on the Ballyhea Says No group, conclusions on 15. And then the last 2 chapters are the list and biographies of those whom I've quoted in the report and the list of references. And the last 2 chapters are important, because all told, there are nearly 50 different experts quoted with 8 pages of references, which means that this report isn't just heavily punctuated with quotations from those various experts. It could even be said to have been written by them. And that's why on the front page it says compiled by Diarmuid O'Flynn, because it was written actually by the experts. I wanted to use their words to make our arguments. So as we go back to the conception, design and birth of the euro, to the crisis as foretold and as it unfolded, through the responses of the various EU institutions, economic and monetary experts from various corners of the globe, from left, right and centre, from academia, from the world of high finance and from the world of politics, all in their own words lead us to the same conclusions: that the euro as designed was a catastrophe waiting to happen, that as a direct consequence of that flawed design, the eurozone would suffer disaster, and finally, that the actions taken to alleviate the effects of the crisis would in fact intensify them. The report quotes extensively from the various writings and interviews with 2 senior IMF officials involved with the Troika in Ireland. That was Ajay Chopra and Ashoka Moda, probably mangled their names, who were scathing in their assessments of the ECB especially. It quotes from those who were inside the tent during the concept and design stage, from Jean Monnet himself back in the 1950s, for whom a common currency was an integral part of his vision for a United States of Europe, to Bernard Connolly in the 1990s, former head of the unit responsible for the European monetary system and the monetary policies in the European Commission. It quotes from outsiders who had great insight, economists such as Paul de Grooy of the London School of Economics and Carol Whelan from UCD in Ireland, whose opinions were regularly sought by both the Commission and the Parliament. It quotes from those two great protagonists within the Eurogroup, Jeroen Dijsselbloem and Yanis Varoufakis, and it finds some common ground in what they had to say. It quotes from abroad, from the United States, including two Nobel Prize-winning economists, Milton Friedman and Joseph Stiglitz. Quote upon quote upon quote, chapter after chapter after chapter, and the tale it tells is one of unmitigated disaster. There were winners, if you want to call them that. Where misery abounds, there too you will find the profiteers, and by were those profits made. Over the 9 years that the Ballyhea Says No campaign group has been campaigning, 9 years during which people have been crushed under a new debt burden, two words have sprung into the public consciousness: neoliberalism and austerity. The first, neoliberalism, and as shown conclusively in the report, is an integral and deliberate part of the euro and eurozone design. The second, austerity, and likewise shown conclusively in the report, is a direct result of the first. These are the terrible trends of the eurozone, and they go hand in glove: neoliberalism and austerity. But there is so much more. One of the many major flaws in the euro design is that the ECB is not, never was, and never will be a lender of last resort. And this, allied to the fact that they had surrendered their own currency and with it their monetary sovereignty, meant that as individual eurozone member states came under attack on the financial markets, they were left defenceless, exposed to the mercies of the global financiers, and they found no mercy. But, and as detailed in these pages, those financiers found profits, huge profits. When eventually the ECB did move, in tandem with the Eurogroup, the suffering member states still found no mercy. They got relief of sorts, but it came with a price, a heavy price. Loans at exorbitant interest rates initially. The rates came down after a couple of years, but loans that also came with conditions attached, penal conditions, austerity measures. Slash and burn, cut and cut again, squeeze and squeeze some more. The people, the 99.9%, forced to pay the price for the greed of the 0.1%. Hundreds of billions of private bank debt transposed to national debt at the behest of bankers. And there were other winners. Through all of this, member states such as Ireland, Greece, Spain, Italy, Portugal found themselves being preached to by others, but by Germany above all. And yet, as shown in a chapter on its own in this report, despite the fact that probably the most reckless of all the multitude of reckless bankers in the Eurozone were German bankers, the country that actually gained most from the crisis in the form of a major inflow of nervous billions, in the form of increased exports, and in the form of hundreds of billions of repatriated debt, bank debt, was Germany. As put so pithily by Michael Lewis, quoted in this report, the difference between German bankers and the others in the Eurozone was that Germany became something like a mirror image of Ireland, Iceland, Greece, and for that matter, the United States, where other countries used foreign money to fuel various forms of insanity. The Germans, through their bankers, used their own money to enable foreigners to behave insanely. And please understand, and I want you to understand this is not an attack on Germany or Germans. There is a war going on at the moment, a global war, but it's not a war between nations, not a war between peoples. It's a war between the haves and the have-nots, a war between an elite and greedy few and us, the many. The massive bailout of banks, the enormous transfer of hundreds of billions of bank debt to the public purse, the transfer of hundreds of billions of profits in the other direction, that is all part of this war. And propaganda also forms a major front. It's not just the debt that's been transformed from private to public. It's also the blame. The unfettered and unmitigated greed of bankers and financiers caused the crash, but somehow we, the people, have ended up as the culprits. I say enough. To end all this, to swing the balance of power back in our favour, we've got to stand up, and we've got to stand together. Irish and Italian, Polish and Portuguese, Swedish and Spanish, German and Greek, wherever, whoever, we've got to stand together. For 9 years, Ballyhea, the city group, has stood practically alone on this issue. This was never a cause that should have been left to a small group from a small parish in a small country to fight, but fight it we did. And now it's time for those whose duty it actually was to take over. That's you, our elected representatives from across the European Union. And today, we're asking that all of you stand with us. Today, we're asking that you take up this fight, please. Sinead, go to Míle Maith.
Merci beaucoup.
Thanks very much.
On the Sunday after the presentation of that report, this was our final march. Hopefully, it wasn't all in vain.